It was the evening of the month of March, when a chilling call came through to the Bridgemore police station in the quiet English town of Eldridge. The sun had just dipped below the horizon, casting long shadows across the streets, and the station had begun to settle into its usual evening lull. Then the phone rang. Sergeant Daniel Reeves picked it up, expecting the usual, a noise complaint, maybe a drunk and disorderly report. But the voice that greeted him on the other end was tight with fear. There's a car. A white car. Parked outside an old building in the Norbury Industrial Estate, near the abandoned complex. The driver, he's still inside. And he's covered in blood. For a moment, Reeves said nothing. He stared at the desk, letting the words sink in. "You're sure?" he asked. "Yes," the caller whispered. "I didn't go close, but there's blood. A lot of it. Please send someone." The line went dead. Reeves immediately radioed dispatch. Officers were sent to Norbury Industrial Estate, a crumbling stretch of warehouses and shuttered factories that hadn't seen life in over a decade. It was the kind of place people avoided after dark, half because of urban legends, half because of the things that had actually happened there. And now, it seemed, something else had. What they found would mark the beginning of a case darker than anyone in Eldridge could have imagined. Within minutes, a convoy of patrol cars tore through the narrow streets of Eldridge, blue lights flashing against the darkening sky. An ambulance followed closely behind, sirens screaming. By the time they reached Norbury Industrial Estate, a small crowd had already formed, neighbors, curious onlookers, workers from nearby garages, all standing in a hushed semicircle around the car in question. It was a white Vauxhall Astra, parked slightly crooked along the curb near the chain-link fence of the abandoned warehouse. The windows were fogged. The inside was dim. But from the outside, one thing was clear. There was blood. A disturbing amount of it. Sergeant Reeves and his team pushed through the crowd. "Step back. Everyone step back," he shouted as two uniformed officers cordoned off the area with police tape. The ambulance crew stood ready, while the forensic team, already briefed en route, began snapping on gloves and unloading their equipment. The tension was thick, the silence only broken by the crackle of radios and the murmurs of the growing crowd. And then, slowly, the lead officer approached the driver's side of the car and opened the door. Inside, the air was heavy with the metallic scent of blood. The man slumped over the steering wheel was motionless, his face pale and streaked with grime and dried blood. The officers checked for signs of life, a shallow breath, a pulse, but there was nothing. He was dead. One of the officers reached into the man's jacket pocket and pulled out a worn leather wallet. Flipping it open, the name inside caught their immediate attention: James Harrow. The name rang alarm bells at the station. James Harrow was no stranger to the Eldridge Police Department. He had long been under scrutiny for multiple business fraud cases, schemes that had ripped off investors, small business owners, and local entrepreneurs alike. Though never fully convicted, his shady dealings had left a trail of ruined lives. Now, seeing him like this, lifeless, trapped inside a car by an abandoned warehouse, raised more questions than answers. Could it be that someone he had cheated or trapped in one of his business deals had come back for revenge? The officers exchanged looks, knowing this was going to be a long and tangled investigation. But who could it be? That was the question haunting them all. James Harrow had cheated countless people over the years, small business owners, investors, even close associates. His web of deception stretched far and wide, tangled with promises broken and trust betrayed. With so many potential enemies, the police faced an overwhelming challenge: where to even begin looking for the person responsible for his death. The investigation officially began in earnest. The police dug into every detail, starting with James Harrow's recent activities and contacts. They checked his phone records, hoping for a lead. What they found made the room go quiet. The last call on his phone was to his wife, Emily Hart. As they dug deeper, another detail caught their attention. James was 37 years old, while Emily was only 19. The officers exchanged puzzled looks. Such a large age gap raised questions about the marriage. How had it come to be? Was it a genuine relationship, or was something else at play? As they looked further into James and Emily's background, the picture became even more complicated. The police came to know that there had been a lot of issues surrounding their marriage, especially from Emily's family. Her parents had strongly opposed the relationship from the beginning. Emily was only 19 when she married James, a man nearly twice her age. Her mother, Martha Hart, was in fact the same age as James, 37. That detail alone had created tension and discomfort in the family. They were not happy about the marriage. Not just because of the age difference, but because of James himself, a man with a reputation, already entangled in financial scams and shady dealings. Emily's father, Richard Hart, had reportedly been the most vocal in opposing the relationship. A quiet, reserved man by nature, Richard had grown increasingly distant from Emily ever since the marriage. Behind closed doors, tensions had only escalated. And now, somehow, the police began to feel that Emily's family might be involved in James Harrow's death. What made them think so were the chat messages retrieved from James's mobile phone. The most recent conversation was with Emily. The tone was soft, affectionate. She had asked him to meet her at the old warehouse in Norbury Industrial Estate. The messages hinted at spending some quiet, intimate time together away from everything and everyone. It was a strange choice of place, a cold, isolated, crumbling building on the edge of town, and now it was a crime scene. Was James lured there? Was it a setup? The officers couldn't ignore the possibility. To cross-check timelines and statements, they reached out to James Harrow's immediate family, his parents and younger sister. During questioning, a conflicting detail emerged. According to them, James had mentioned nothing about meeting Emily that evening. Instead, he had told them he was heading out for a real estate deal, something about a lucrative opportunity involving an old industrial property on the outskirts of town. He hadn't shared many details, but he'd sounded confident, even excited. There was no hint of fear or suspicion in his voice. This contradiction deepened the mystery. Why would James tell his family one thing, and Emily something else? Were both stories a cover for something else entirely? The police now had two versions of James's last known movements, and a growing sense that nothing about this case was going to be simple. As they pieced together the timeline, another revealing detail surfaced. James and Emily had gotten married only a few months ago, quietly, without informing their families. It wasn't until 2 weeks ago, when Emily returned to her parents' home after a fight with James, that her family even learned about the marriage. According to statements from neighbors and people close to the couple, some said that the argument had been serious and some said they seemed happy together. Emily had packed her things and left in a hurry, refusing to return despite James reportedly trying to contact her several times. That raised new red flags for investigators. Why had she asked to meet him again so suddenly, and in such a strange, isolated location? Now, with mounting inconsistencies and emotional tension in play, the police began to focus closely on Emily Hart herself. What was her role in all of this? Was she an unsuspecting wife caught in the middle of something bigger? Or had she played a part, knowingly or otherwise, in leading James Harrow to his death? The questions were piling up, and Emily was about to face them all. Their efforts paid off. A weathered CCTV camera mounted on the corner of an old service station, just down the road from the Norbury Industrial Estate, had captured a series of horrifying visuals, blurry but unmistakable. The footage showed James Harrow. He was stumbling rather, down the dimly lit alley near the warehouse. His shirt was soaked in blood. There was deep stab wounds in his back, and a gruesome gash across his neck. His movements were desperate, his balance faltering. Somehow, he managed to reach his car, the white Vauxhall Astra parked crookedly near the chain-link fence. He pulled open the driver's door and collapsed into the seat. But that was as far as he got. His hand reached toward the ignition, but he never had the strength to start the engine. Within seconds, his body slumped forward onto the steering wheel, unconscious, bleeding and fading fast. There was no sign of anyone else in the frame. No weapon. No attacker. But the sheer brutality of his injuries, and the fact that he had still been trying to escape, left officers stunned. Whoever had done this hadn't just wanted James dead. They had wanted him to suffer. And now, the urgency to question Emily, and possibly protect her, if she too was a target, became greater than ever. As the investigation deepened, the detectives reviewing the CCTV footage and forensic reports began to form a clearer picture and new doubts. James Harrow wasn't a small man. At 6 feet tall and well-built, he had the kind of physical presence that would make it difficult for someone to overpower him, especially someone like Emily, who was young, slightly built, and with no known history of violence. The brutality of the attack, the stab wound to the back, the deep slash across the neck, the amount of blood loss, all pointed to someone who knew what they were doing or had help. The question wasn't just who had killed James. It was now how. And with whom. The police were becoming increasingly certain Emily couldn't have done this alone. If she was involved, someone else had helped her. And whoever that was still out there. As suspicion around Emily deepened, the tech forensics team was brought in to analyze mobile phone records, both James's and Emily's. What they uncovered only added to the growing mystery. Using cell tower triangulation, the police tracked the location history of both phones on the day of the incident. The data showed that Emily's phone had indeed pinged off a tower in the Norbury Industrial Estate area around the estimated time of the crime. But there was more. Earlier that evening, both James's and Emily's phones had been active in the same cell tower zone, a residential area on the west side of Eldridge. The signals then moved together, tracking a path that led straight to the abandoned warehouse in Norbury. It was a quiet stretch of road. No CCTV along the route. No witnesses. But the data was clear. James and Emily had met earlier that evening and traveled together to the place where he was later found dead. This was no random attack. No mugging. No chance encounter. It was deliberate. The focus on Emily sharpened, and now, the pressure was on to find out who else might have been with her that night. Just as investigators began narrowing down timelines and locations, another piece of digital evidence emerged, one that added an unexpected layer to the already tangled web. While scanning cell tower data, the police noticed something strange. A third mobile number had been active in each of the same areas James and Emily had traveled through that evening. At first, it was assumed to be a coincidence, perhaps another unrelated device passing through the same sectors. But protocol demanded a deeper check. When they ran the number through their system, the result was chilling. The number belonged to Martha Hart, Emily's mother. She, too, had been in the residential area where James and Emily first met. Her phone had also moved, tracking the same route, and pinged off the same Norbury tower around the time James was believed to have been attacked. It was no longer just a matter of marital conflict or a bad breakup. Now, the case had expanded. The police weren't just dealing with a possible crime of passion. They were staring into the shadow of a family conspiracy. And Emily's mother, once just an unhappy parent, had suddenly become a person of extreme interest. The mounting evidence painted a grim picture. The police began to feel increasingly certain Emily had not acted alone. The involvement of her mother, Martha Hart, was becoming impossible to ignore. Whether it was through direct participation or by aiding and abetting, the signs pointed to a conspiracy between mother and daughter. With no room for doubt, both Emily and Martha were taken into custody and brought in for questioning. The sterile interrogation rooms of the Eldridge police station now held the weight of a family's darkest secrets. Detectives were determined to uncover the truth. Why had these two women allegedly turned against James Harrow? What had driven them to such violence? And most importantly, who else, if anyone, was involved? The questioning was about to begin. Under the harsh glare of the interrogation room lights, Emily sat composed but guarded. When asked about the attack on James, she shook her head firmly. "I had nothing to do with it," she said, her voice steady but distant. "We hadn't seen each other for a while. Things between us were complicated, yes. But I wanted to meet him, to talk, to try and fix things." She took a breath, her eyes flickering with a mix of regret and frustration. "We decided to meet at the abandoned building. That was our place sometimes, where we could be alone, away from prying eyes. We wanted to have some intimate time, nothing more." Emily paused, then added quietly, "After that, I left." "Whatever happened after I left? I don't know. I swear, I wasn't there when he was hurt." Her words hung in the room, leaving more questions than answers. If she truly left before the attack, then who or what had followed James? In the next room, Martha Hart faced the investigators with a mix of defiance and concern. James Harrow was not a good man, she began, her voice cold and unwavering. My daughter made a choice without telling me, to meet him secretly. Naturally, I was worried. I couldn't just sit back. She explained how she had decided to follow Emily that evening, keeping a discreet distance to make sure her daughter was safe. I stayed nearby until Emily left the place, Martha insisted, and then I left too. I am not involved in whatever happened after that. Her eyes hardened. James had plenty of enemies, people he cheated, betrayed, and crossed in his business dealings. If anyone wanted to hurt him, it would be one of them. Martha's words introduced a new angle, one that hinted at external threats lurking beyond the family's drama. The police knew one thing for certain: this investigation was far from straightforward. The interrogation room grew colder as the detectives leaned in, their voices firm but probing. Emily, the lead detective began, we need to understand what happened between you and James. Why did the marriage fall apart? Why were you separated? And most importantly, why did you marry him in the first place, with such a huge age difference? Emily swallowed hard, the weight of the questions settling over her. She looked down and began, I met James about 2 years ago, when I was still in school. There was a sports meet in town, and he was there. I was drawn to him, his lifestyle, the way he lived. It was all so different from what I knew. Her voice faltered for a moment, then steadied. We started talking and slowly we grew closer. Before I knew it, we decided to get married. She sighed deeply. I told my parents, but they refused. They didn't want me to marry someone so much older. It was too sudden, too much for them to accept. So, we married in secret. We started living together, keeping it all hidden. My parents thought I was staying at my college hostel. Emily's eyes glistened with sadness. They only found out about the marriage about 2 weeks ago, when I left James and came home. She swallowed again, the tension in the room thickening. The autopsy report arrived like a cold wave over the investigation. Doctors confirmed that James Harrow had been heavily intoxicated at the time of his attack. But more chillingly, a powerful sleeping drug was found in his system, something that had been slipped into his drink without his knowledge. The implications were clear and troubling. No enemy lurking in the shadows could have easily drugged him like that. This had to be the work of someone close, someone he trusted enough to share a drink with. The evidence suggested James was deliberately made vulnerable, his senses dulled, his strength drained. And then, when he was weakest, the brutal attack was carried out. This detail turned the investigation inward, deepening the suspicion around those closest to him. Who had the access, the opportunity, and the motive to do this? Despite their earlier denials, the pressure in the interrogation room was mounting. The weight of evidence, from the autopsy report to the mobile data and surveillance footage, was relentless. Faced with the truth closing in, Emily and Martha's defenses began to crumble. Hours into questioning, their resolve broke. In a shaky, tearful voice, Emily finally confessed, "It was us. We did it together." Martha nodded, her face pale but resolute. The detectives listened as the two revealed the carefully planned murder, how they drugged James, chose the abandoned place, and attacked him when he was most vulnerable. Their joint confession closed the long circle of suspicion, revealing a dark family tragedy fueled by desperation, betrayal, and shattered trust. James Harrow was a wealthy man, with considerable assets and a lifestyle that many envied. As the investigation unfolded, the police became increasingly convinced that money was at the heart of the crime. The mother and daughter's confession only deepened their suspicions. It wasn't just anger or fear that drove them, but a calculated desire to claim James's fortune. In a final round of questioning, after hours of silence and tears, Emily opened up, not to justify her actions, but to tell her truth. She stared blankly at the table in front of her, then whispered, "After the marriage, everything changed." Her voice trembled as she continued. "James wasn't the man I thought he was. He was sick, controlling. He would force himself on me. He didn't care if I cried or begged him to stop. Most nights ended in rape and violence. I felt trapped. Owned. The room fell silent. Emily wiped her tears, then added, "Later, I discovered he'd done this before, with other women. He had been married multiple times. I was just another one. And once he got what he wanted, he would move on, disappear." Her confession painted a different picture, one of deep emotional and physical abuse, of a young girl lured by wealth and charm, only to be discarded and brutalized. Martha, sitting beside her, nodded slowly, her face etched with pain. "I couldn't watch my daughter be destroyed," she said. "I begged her to leave, but by then it was too late. He had already broken her." As Emily's statement continued, the room seemed to freeze. She took a deep breath, her voice raw. The abuse wasn't just physical. He played mind games, twisted ones. She looked up, eyes brimming with tears. "Once I started standing up to him, pushing back, he said he was done with me. He told me I was too immature, too dramatic. That he wanted someone more womanly. Someone his age." The detectives leaned in, barely breathing. "He said he wanted my mother." Silence. "He told me to go back to my parents' house. Said he'd had enough of me, and that I should send Martha to him instead. He actually believed he could replace me with my own mother." Emily's hands were clenched into fists. That was the moment something inside me snapped. I felt sick, humiliated, and scared. He didn't just ruin me, he wanted to ruin my mother too. It was a chilling moment for the investigators. The story had taken yet another dark turn. From fraud, to control, to sexual manipulation that had spiraled beyond anything they had imagined. Emily's voice grew quieter as she continued, but the horror in her words only deepened. "After I left him, he wouldn't stop calling." Her fingers trembled as she recounted the barrage of threats. "He told me to come back, not just alone, but with my mother. He said if I didn't, he would come to our house himself, drag my mother out in front of my father, and do unspeakable things. He said he would destroy my whole family. That none of us would be safe unless I did what he wanted." Emily paused, her eyes hollow. "That's when I broke down and told my parents everything. The secret marriage, the abuse, the blackmail, the threats. They were devastated. They had sent me to college, trusted me to grow, to build a life." She swallowed hard. But instead, I had fallen into a nightmare. Her parents were shattered, not just by what James had done, but by the realization that their daughter had suffered in silence, spiraling deeper into a life they had no idea she was living. It wasn't just a crime scene that the police were piecing together now. It was a trail of manipulation, exploitation, psychological torment, and ultimately, a desperate, violent escape from a predator who wore the mask of a husband. Emily's voice turned brittle as she described the night. Everything spiraled further out of control. "One evening, without warning, James barged into our home." Her jaw clenched as the memory surfaced. "He was shouting, demanding I come back with him. And when I refused, he turned to my mother. He said if I wasn't interested, maybe she was. He looked my father in the eye and said, 'One of them comes with me tonight. Or next time, I'm not coming alone. I'll bring friends, and it won't end well.'" A chill ran through the room as detectives absorbed the gravity of her words. Emily continued, her voice shaking. "My father stood between us, trembling. My mother was in tears. But none of us knew what to do. We thought about calling the police, but what good would that do? James was a man with powerful connections. A man who had already cheated investors out of millions and still walked free. A man who had never faced consequences. They knew he'd slip through the cracks again," Emily whispered. "We weren't dealing with an ordinary man. We were dealing with a monster with money and influence. The police couldn't protect us. So we decided," she trailed off, her eyes locked on the table. "We had to protect ourselves. So they schemed. Until then, it had always been James who chased, calling, threatening, begging, demanding. But this time, Emily changed the script. For the first time in weeks, she messaged him. A soft, seemingly apologetic text. She said she missed him. That she regretted walking away. That maybe they could start over. Dinner, a long drive, maybe even something more intimate. She wrote that she only left because of family pressure, and that she wanted to come back, She just needed a little time to fix things at home. It was exactly what James wanted to hear. He responded almost instantly. Desperate. Willing. Enticed. Behind that text, however, was a different story unfolding in the shadows. Emily and her mother, Martha, had already purchased a bottle of his favorite liquor and a strip of powerful prescription sleeping pills. The plan was forming, desperate, dangerous, but in their eyes, necessary. They weren't just trying to get revenge. They were trying to end a nightmare. The bait was set, and James, arrogant and unafraid, walked straight into the trap. The next evening, as planned, Emily and James met again. He looked pleased, smug even, as if he had won some long, twisted game. Emily, masking her disgust with forced warmth, handed him a drink. His favorite, the one he always asked for. He never noticed the slightly bitter aftertaste. The sleeping pills dissolved silently in the liquor. They chatted for a while, Emily pretending to laugh at his crude jokes, nodding at his plans to start over. His speech began to slur. His eyelids drooped. He was fading, slowly but surely. And then Emily made the suggestion. Let's go somewhere private. The abandoned warehouse in Norbury Industrial Estate. He agreed, grinning drunkenly. She helped him into the car, and they drove into the dark, deserted corner of town. What James didn't know was that Martha, Emily's mother, was following behind in a second car, headlights off, far enough not to be noticed. Inside the cold, decaying building, James leaned against a broken pillar, his balance off, his movements sluggish. He reached for Emily and she let him. Her body stiffened, but she didn't pull away. They kissed briefly. It was hollow, mechanical. A performance. He began to undress her, slurring promises of love, of starting fresh, of forgiveness, things she no longer believed, if she ever had. She didn't resist. She only kept her eyes fixed on the ceiling of the crumbling warehouse, her thoughts somewhere else. It happened quickly, clumsily. There was no tenderness, no consent, just habit and power, as it had always been with James. And in that moment, Martha stepped from the shadows. 2 swift stabs to his neck from behind. The blade struck deep. Blood sprayed. James gasped, stunned. Before he could even turn around fully, Emily slashed his throat. A single, clean motion, rage and pain behind it. James stumbled, hands clutching at the wounds, his body jerking in confusion and agony. He tried to scream, but only blood poured out. Still, somehow, he broke into a run toward the car. Martha and Emily stood frozen in the darkness, watching. He made it to the white Vauxhall Astra, flung open the door, collapsed into the driver's seat, but never managed to start the engine. The keys remained untouched. From where they stood, Emily and Martha saw his head slump forward against the steering wheel. He was either unconscious or dead. Without a word, they turned, walked briskly back to Martha's car, and disappeared into the night. Just when the police thought the case had reached its conclusion, new perspectives began to emerge. A deeper investigation into James's personal life, particularly through his close friends and business associates, revealed a starkly different image of the man. Contrary to Emily and Martha's disturbing claims, several friends vouched for James's character, especially with women. He was no saint, one associate admitted, but a monster? That's not the James the first knew. Others outright called the story a fabrication, a cold and calculated setup by the mother and daughter duo, possibly for his money and assets. According to James's legal team, he had recently moved significant portions of his wealth to overseas accounts and had been preparing to name Emily as his primary beneficiary. This new angle cast long shadows over Emily's tearful confession and Martha's narrative of maternal protection. Could it have all been a lie? The forensic evidence still aligned with the women's confession. The drugs in his system, the stab wounds, the timeline. But now, motive was under serious scrutiny. Was it truly self-defense from a predator? Or a premeditated crime wrapped in a tragic backstory? As the courtroom battle loomed, the case remained open, and the town of Eldridge found itself divided, some believing in Emily's horror story, others convinced they had witnessed the perfect crime in plain sight. What do you think really happened that night in the abandoned warehouse? Was it a desperate act of self-defense by a young woman pushed to the edge? Or was it a chillingly orchestrated murder motivated by greed and revenge? James Harrow is dead. Emily and her mother, Martha, are behind bars. But the truth? It may still be tangled somewhere between what was said and what really happened. We want to know what you think. Share your thoughts. Was justice served or manipulated?